Hello, and welcome to another episode of Latina Life with Jen and Milena. Our super Latina today is an emerging talent in Hollywood. She's had an unconventional upbringing, which led her to music, led her to acting, and her current journey in her career. You'll be seeing a lot of her on Disney Plus's new series, Goosebumps: The Vanishing. Let's welcome to the show, Francesca Noel. Francesca, thank you for
Hi.
joining us.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
We're happy to have you. We are very, very excited to have you on. We have lots to talk about because there's so much that's going on, especially in the new year. But why don't we just dive right in and let's just talk about you, your childhood. Again, unconventional. There has been progress, but in the Latin community, you don't really see two moms, two dads, and that was your story, right? You were
Yeah,
raised by two moms. You were adopted. So tell us about that experience for you.
sure. Yeah. I was raised in Woodstock, New York, which is upstate, about like 2 hours away from the city. It's super artsy. I don't know if you know about the Woodstock Festival, but that's where it kind of came to be. And it's very folky, very feminist, very intersectional with religions, but not with race. So I grew up super isolated, and I was the only Latin person that I knew. And it was pretty much just me and my best friend who's half Japanese, and together we were in our own little bubble in the woods, and we would like take on the gremlins. Yeah, it was a really interesting upbringing. It was beautiful, but it was also really hard.
I'm sure because did you like when did you start like asking questions about like your background? Were you just because that must have been something that you don't look like both your moms because they are white, not,
Yeah.
so when did you really want to start discovering like, oh, what's my background? Like where, like, how come I have darker hair and maybe some darker features?
Yeah, yeah. I would say it was pretty early on. I mean, so I was adopted by one of my moms. My other mom is
Okay.
the birth mom. So I did have obviously knowledge of what I was and that my father was Afro-Panamanian, but I wasn't raised with that. So it was just really difficult, I think, growing up surrounded by a lot of waspy people. It was a very red area, and I didn't look like them, and my parents were gay, and it was really hard. There was a lot of ridicule. Yeah, I think kids know right away that something's off, and kids can be cruel. So I think I learned really young that I was different.
Yeah. And that's what's hard because, like, we talk about all the time how, like, you're right, kids are mean. For example, myself growing up, I grew up in a very white neighborhood. And so I was always called an Oreo
Mm,
because, there was it just was like I was brown on the outside, but like I
yeah,
was white. And I was like, I don't even know what that means because
yeah,
my friends are white. So, like, what am I supposed to be doing?
right.
So there was a lot of confusion about like, but then I would go home or I would see my family members and then like we spoke Spanish and I just didn't understand,
Mm,
so it's unfortunate, but it happens to all of us, you know what I mean? Because I think Jen
yeah,
also has similar story about that too. And so did you ever want to like learn how to speak Spanish? Like, you know what I mean? Like, was that
yeah,
something that you sort of wanted to get into and sort of
yeah.
discover as you're
I
peeling off the layers of who you are because I feel like we all do that as we get older, right? We're like, okay,
mean,
let's find out more about ourselves.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that was something that I came to when I was older. That was probably around the time that Romeo and Juliet happened that I started to really feel like, okay, I want to connect to who I actually am. Because for
Mm-hmm.
so long I'd been living as a white girl. And for me,
Mm-hmm.
that was the thought. And it was like, okay, I'm an aberration if I'm not a white girl. And anything that I can do to erase, half of my identity or my entire sense of self, I should do. So I grew up, straightening my hair and like
Yeah.
frying the shit out of it. And
Hmm.
I got colored contacts and I wore them
Yeah.
for 5 fucking years. And I got
I hear
horrible
you.
eye infections. And I remember
I
getting
had
like,
green ones,
yes,
really.
I had green ones too.
And
I
they
mean,
looked horrible. Oh,
I know they look terrible.
yeah.
Yeah. It was really weird. And that it was just so much like hatred within me. And I felt very like in a way closeted with that. And I I really it took a lot of work for me and a lot of therapy to go through to kind of come to this place where I'm like, okay, I'm really proud to be Latina, and I'm really proud to be Panamanian, and learning the language has been a long journey for me. I'm still doing Duolingo, and I definitely don't feel like well seated in that, but it's very empowering to do.
It takes practice. It's like you just have to keep on doing it every day. And it's also helpful, and it's hard too. It's helpful when you're around people, right, who speak the language. But
Yeah.
it's hard growing up as like, listen, my parents are both from Mexico. I grew up, they pulled themselves up by the bootstraps. I went to Beverly Hills High School. I'm
Mm,
in a situation in a community that's all white where people
mm,
think I'm Persian and no one speaks the language. So it's like I'm not practicing it, you know? So that's also, it's sort of like this double-edged sword because they expect, you know, Latins to succeed, but then when you succeed, there's nobody around you to
oh, so
really
true.
help
Oh,
you stay
yeah.
rooted in your culture. So that's
Yeah.
difficult. I do have to go back to, you know, obviously you had some tough experiences, it sounds like, because you said you had to take on the gremlins
Yeah.
with your friend, with your best friend. So tell me, because that was one question, you know, what were peers can be tough, they can be cruel. So
Yeah.
what is there a moment that comes to you where you had to like stand up for yourself and like how did you deal with it? Because there's other people too that are similar in your
Yeah.
same situation. Like what would you tell them?
Yeah. I mean, I think I felt very ostracized in general. And, you know, I think growing up is just very hard for anyone.
Mm,
And I feel a lot of empathy, to be honest, for the people who kind of pushed me out of their circles because they were kids, and it's hard. And I think we don't give any kid enough tools to understand what they're going through and to understand people around them. So I don't know. I would say the whole experience was just difficult, and I've kind of blocked out a lot of it. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm sorry if that doesn't answer your question so specifically, but I think the best thing you can do to get through it is just to believe in yourself and to believe that you're worth something, even when people tell you that you're not. And even when there's no one there who's like saying anything about you, who's just kind of pushing you to the corner, but just to know that you are strong enough and you're valuable, you know?
absolutely. And was music a way of you coping with everything? How did you get into music?
Yeah, music was super therapeutic to me. So I got into, sorry, that's my cat in the litter box.
That's okay.
I got into music through my mom. She was on Broadway when I was not born, when she was on Broadway back in the 70s for like 6 months. And it really stuck with her. And yeah, she gave me music and started me off in musical theater, which now I despise musical theater, but also I fucking love music. It's a very strange relationship. But yeah, I went to Bard Conservatory of Music when I was in high school because I hated high school and I love music. And I was studying classical, and I was studying classical guitar and classical voice and composition. And that to me was super therapeutic, but it was also why I couldn't go that route professionally, because it was like, that's too deep, you know, like that was too much.
Okay. And then
That's
I know you acted as a
Yeah.
child, but did you take a break or were you doing that at the same time?
No, I did take a break because I got pretty deep into the opera thing for a while. And I was like,
Okay.
this is really cool. I don't know. I think it's just really great to give kids the option to like explore things. And my parents definitely did do a good job of that. So
but that's awesome that you were able to, you have the best of both worlds, right? The music and then the acting. So tell us about how the acting happened for you.
well, like I said, I'd done it when I was younger, and I kind of got like stage mommed into it. And to be honest, I fucking hated it. Um, but then I was in college at Berkeley in Boston, and I was going through a really tough family loss, and I was super depressed. And then I had the opportunity to audition for Romeo and Juliet. And so I took a bus to New York, and it was a 4 hour one way, and I missed class at Berkeley, which is like bad, you know? This
Right,
is
Yeah.
right.
I
Yeah.
wanted that shit. Yeah, so I did, and I did my audition, and it was such a terrible audition. It was probably one of the worst I've ever done, but I booked it, and that kind of took me out of music and into acting, and I just fell in love.
And that was that, yeah, that's, and Romeo and Juliet's very near and dear to your heart, right? So
Yeah. Yeah,
it's
that
like your baby.
It is. It's like my baby. That project in particular, I think also because when I was in high school, I had a Romeo and Juliet, like a book version of all the plays, and I'd carried that around like a Linus blanket, and that was like so freeing to me for some reason to read about these tragedies. Like that tells you about my fucked up psyche at that time. Um, but yeah, I loved that project in particular because it was the first time that I'd seen a Black and Latino cast, and
Mm,
no white people.
right.
And I was like, oh my God, please, like this just, I feel so seen. I
Yeah.
felt like, oh my God, I can wear my hair the way that it is and people will think it's beautiful. And that made me cry so many times. Yeah, it just taught me a lot about like myself and my worth and beauty and being in the center of a narrative. And even today, we've only had literally 7 people. I was looking at the Annenberg report this morning. It was 7 Latinos since 2007, I think, or no, it was 8. Anyway, it was a really small number who had led a feature film, and that was like a tentpole or something. And that just really fucking bothers me. So yeah, that project meant a lot to me. It never came out, but it was
No,
beautiful.
but you know what? It's important. It's important to keep on doing that. We were actually at a recent event that Carlos Eric Lopez like put on for Dia de los Muertos, and Eva Longoria received an honor, life and legacy honor. And the one thing is that she said that really stuck to me is the fact that we have to change the culture. In order to change the culture, we need to always keep working at it in front of the camera, behind the camera, because we won't change it until we see a reflection of ourselves everywhere.
Yeah,
That is super important. So sometimes you think like, are we really doing a big thing? Are we really doing like, are we really making an impact? We are. Sharing your
yeah,
story here, us being on here, that makes an impact. You, Romeo and Juliet, even though maybe it wasn't seen before, it will be seen. That makes an impact. All those
yeah,
being a part of a production like that, then it just ignites the fire to keep on doing it and to create more. So, I mean, that's amazing that you were part of that and that it had such an impact on you. And I was just actually really curious because you mentioned, how you cried, being there surrounded by like seeing the first brown and black cast, going back just to your childhood. Did your parents, introduce you to the Latin side? Was that hard? And let me say, it can be hard. I mean, I'm married to someone who's not Latino. We have, my kids are mixed. So it is hard. It does take an effort to speak Spanish. Thank God I have my side of the family. We go, to their homes for holidays and special occasions on so they see that. But I was just curious, were you asking for that? When were you asking for it? Like when did that all
yeah.
happen?
I mean, I think for my mom, it was buried in so much trauma because there was a divorce and there was a lot of mess there. So
Mm.
yeah, and my father was not a good person by any
Mhm.
means. So we really were not in that. It was just not something we talked about. I had a very like practical magic upbringing. It was just very like white feminism and dancing around the fire for the moon and having ceremonies. And it was beautiful. It was its own
Yeah,
thing.
absolutely.
But yeah, I was totally lacking that connection to my culture, which, looking back on it, it's hard. It's also a gift, I think, because it gave me a lot of grit and it
Yeah.
gave me a lot of interesting perspective into another world that I never would have maybe seen so much of, which is that kind of practical magic thing. So
mm, yeah. But I mean, I have to say, like the fact that when you did Romeo and Juliet, and then you were like, I could be me. I mean, I feel like again, a lot of us go through that where it's like, oh my God, like you're in your community where you're like, okay, I'm not the only one because I know I have had many jobs being in entertainment business now for like 20 years. And I was on a very, very big show, but I was one of the few Latinas there that actually had like, a really big position within the show. Yet and there was another Latina there, but we would get confused and people would confuse us, and I'm like, okay, we look nothing alike. The only thing
yeah,
that
Yeah.
compares us is our brown hair,
yeah,
and our skin color.
yeah,
And so that was very upsetting, but like as many Latinas, we don't speak up. right? We don't, I feel like we tend to, we're hard workers and sometimes we're afraid. And even though we're loud in other areas of our life, like I feel like in the workplace, sometimes we don't tend to like speak up, you know?
Mm, mm,
And at that time in my life, I didn't speak up. I was just sort of like, wait, did they just really say that to us? Like, did
yeah,
they just really like say, oh, take this because it's brown makeup? Like, did they, you know, things like that were being said. And you're just like, wait, what?
yeah,
And I would love to say that that's changed now, but it hasn't, you know, because I think
right.
situations like that occur. But for you, while this was happening, were you just like, what is it that you wanted to learn more about yourself in when discovering that about your culture? Were you like, oh, were you ever, speaking of your hair, where you're like, oh my God, I want to know more. Like, I want to, did you start asking questions? Like, what did you end up having to do when you really started diving into like more of your Latina roots?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was really more of a feeling, to be honest. It was just a feeling of like not being uncomfortable in my own skin and
Mm-hmm.
being myself. And again, you know, going back to this feeling of like worthiness, so much of the media that we consume is centering white people.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up, I never saw anyone who looked like me, and that was definitely a part of like where I was growing up. That I
Mm-hmm.
could see that wasn't there, but yeah, I mean, that's why I got into this because it is so hard to recognize yourself in media sometimes, just as Latin women. And yeah, I think just learning about my hair, learning about okay, I can tan and I cannot bleach my skin, which is something that I went through when I was a teenager, and that was fucking weird. And yeah, there's a beautiful language and there's all this cultural history and there's this country that I know nothing about and I really want to visit, that half of me is from. And yeah, I mean, it's a really beautiful journey that I've been able to explore, and I'm really glad that I'm at a place where I can do that with.
And food, you can't forget about the
Oh
food.
my God, and the food. When did that start for you? When did you grow up with this culture?
I totally, my mom was from Bolivia. So we like both of my parents were South American from Brazil. So I grew up going back and forth. So like I was raised, my summers, I never got to do summer camp or anything like that. I was shipped off to South America for the entire summer. So like I would come back, and even though I felt so out of place because all of my friends were like, "Oh, I went to summer camp," and "Oh, you know, we went on vacation." My
Yeah.
it wasn't vacation for me. It was like see my entire family for 2 so that's sort of how I learned. And then my parents got divorced, and then I was like divided, right? So I went 1 month with my mom, 1 month with my dad. And, you know, that's sort of how I learned the culture. And looking back, I remember how much I would cry and I'd be like, God, this sucks. Why can't we ever stay in America? And like, why can't I go to summer camps? But as you get older, you sort of like the discoveries. Now I'm like, why can't anybody pay for my ticket to send me back to South America? You know
Yeah,
what I mean? And
exactly.
so
Yeah, yeah,
I'm like, I look back now and I'm like, all the things that I was raised with, I didn't appreciate at the time because I was so different than everybody else. And like you mentioned before, kids are rough. They know when you're different, and they'd be like, oh, you don't get to do summer camp, or you don't get to do that, or you don't get to, you know. And it was like I was teased, and I was, yeah, I just was always like, oh, Milena doesn't get, you know, like to do anything and stuff like that, not understanding like what a treasure it was that I was like going through for my summers, you know, with my family. And so that's why
Yeah.
for me, I'm like, you know, and kids were mean. They'd say I was poor because I couldn't do these things, and just so many cruel things. And I think that affected me. I mean, thank God for therapy, because you're like, why, you know,
Yeah.
but
yeah.
I do appreciate like my culture now and where I come from. And I mean, Jen could tell you the same thing, growing up in Beverly Hills and like, you know, not having what everybody else has, which is fine, but you know, kids will sort of hit you where it hurts sometimes, right, Jen?
Yeah, and I grew up like you, where both of my parents are together and both from Mexico. So a lot of family members. My mom was one of 10, my dad was one of 13. So
Oh my gosh,
he's
I love that.
surrounded by like cousins and aunts and every summer, going over there. So I grew up speaking Spanish and immersed in that. But yeah, Beverly Hills. It's also you could just be excluded because people just don't relate to you, right?
Right.
So you don't have that same kind of, you're not from here and you're not from there at the same time that you're, dealing with. And then you go on to like, second generation, which are my kids, and they're mixed, and it's sort of like that same feeling too that they're wrestling with as well.
Mhm.
And trying to really embrace and still be rooted in the Latin culture. But yeah, we're in a society that and community where, like listen, they're both in college and they're in the Greek life. And when I went to college, I'm like, my mom's like, what's Greek life? Like, you're not gonna, what? What's that? You don't need friends? Like, wait, you need to do this to have friends? Like, you've got your family. What are you talking about? So I didn't do that. So going into it this time with them, I'm like, oh, I get it. Okay, it can be beneficial. Like, don't get me wrong, there can be like, bad sides to it, but there's that benefit of having this community around you. And I see how like included they are. And I'm like, oh, had I known, maybe, but then it could have been different, because I feel like society's different now
Mhm.
than it
Yeah,
was. I think society's different for you now than it was for us, right?
yeah.
Mhm.
Which actually brings me to my next question. Um, growing up, just, I know you're starting in the industry, but
Mhm.
as a, Latina and as a woman, have
Mhm.
you felt that it has been like the people that you get in contact with, the executives, casting, are they inclusive? Is it a bit of a challenge? Have you faced anything challenging because you are Latina and a woman?
Yeah. I mean, I would say I think there's a lot of attempts to change things, and
Mm.
I think that's usually how the way things are. It's just it moves very slowly, and there are people who really want things to change, but then there are people with money and they don't really care. Um,
Right, true.
yeah, I mean, I would say that a lot of that I find, yes, it's difficult to answer your question because
Yeah.
there's a lot of, I mean, I don't know, producers, to be honest, it's really difficult for them because they are working about money and you have to make choices. And that's why I really want to go into producing because you can kind of move that needle there. Uh,
Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I've always gravitated towards roles that are not necessarily written for my color because I think there's a lot of stereotyping that still goes on, and it's so fucking disappointing to see. And I
Mhm.
hate getting that in my inbox, but you do it because it's a job and you need the money and you
Yeah,
need the ability in order to move that needle eventually. Um,
true.
yeah, uh, I don't know. I did want to say though about your point about having those two cultures and now seeing your kids growing up and doing something different. I think a lot of it is like you don't know what you don't know. And so for me, growing up and thinking I was a white girl, which obviously I'm not, ignorance was bliss for me. And
Yeah.
I had no idea what was out there. And so I could kind of live in this beautiful thing. And then when I, turned like 22, 23, that was when the hammer kind of fell. But I did just want to talk about, I think, sorry, I had too much matcha. My brain is like racing.
No,
Oh,
that's
it's all
okay.
good.
There's so much. We have so many layers.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about just that feeling of like coming home and not being the same person that you were. And I think
Yeah.
that's a really maybe like mixed experience that is maybe unrelatable, but maybe also very relatable
Very
because
relatable.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. That was the hardest part for me. I would say the growing up, to be honest, probably wasn't that difficult because I didn't know what I didn't know. But, now being me fully and then coming home to my white parents in Woodstock, that's difficult because
Mm.
they don't know who I am anymore. So
Mm.
I wanted to get that out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Right.
changing and it's
Yeah.
changes.
You're at
Yeah,
this journey. You're on this point in your journey where you're discovering more and more about yourself,
yes,
and about your background and what makes you. you
yes,
know, while you're experiencing all these new things too at the same time, which can be challenging and
yeah,
tough, like you said, like work and where do you want to go with your life and your journey? What's the next job you want to take?
yeah. Oh, is that a question?
Well, which actually what leads us to our next topic, because we're going to be seeing you soon, actually. And I'm so excited about this. I told you my family are huge fans of the franchise.
Well, you're also wearing a shirt.
I'm also wearing my
I
shirt.
love that shirt.
Yeah.
So cool.
I know, I'm wearing my shirt. So you're going to be in the new season of Goosebumps. It's called Goosebumps: The Vanishing. It'll be seen on Disney Plus. You've got lots of familiar co-stars, David Schwimmer from Friends, and Ortiz, as well. Talk
Yeah.
about just being part of this Goosebumps world. Did you ever read the books, and were you familiar, with them beforehand?
Yeah, I grew up reading them. I was such a nerd, and I think by virtue of isolation, I isolated to the library,
Yes.
and I loved reading horror things. I loved reading just like creepy things in the dark corners, and I learned so much. So to get to step onto the set and be working with Anna, I grew up watching Ugly Betty, so that was so fucking cool. And
Amazing.
Aw.
Amazing.
yeah, but yeah, I always dreamed about being like this action superhero fighting the monsters thing, and getting to do that through Goosebumps was such a dream come true.
That must have been so fun. And I love how you were like, I grew up watching Ugly Betty because I feel like we all watched Ugly Betty at the time because we're like, I
Yeah.
don't know, she was so relatable, right?
Mhm.
Like she
Yeah,
was
yeah.
Exactly.
so like some way, somehow we all got to relate to her. And so I love that that was like something that you just brought up because I know that now you're in this show that everybody watches and that's so cool. And I just feel like, have you met somebody that's like given you a good piece of advice that has stayed with you now that you've done like, I mean, you've done so much at such a young age.
Oh, wow, I still feel like I have not done enough and life is so short. Um, I don't know. I guess my mom is always telling me to, use my voice and to say no, which honestly, that's been the biggest help for me because I think in this industry, people are always trying to push you, especially being a Latin woman, being a woman of color.
Mhm.
People are always trying to push you into the corner that they think you belong in. So for me, it's been learning to be like, you know what, go fuck yourself. I'm going to do what I want to do. So that
Yeah.
is always every day in my head. Like, please say no if you need to, you know?
Yeah, because you want to stand your ground. If some, because you're right.
Yeah.
I think we do get pinned to want to go into a corner and just like stay there. And so, because I feel like so, even though at the time I know you don't feel like it, but I know that there's going to be young women, men looking up to you and being like, wow, because you're representing something,
Yeah.
right? So what advice do you want to give like to others?
Um, love yourself, be yourself loudly, say no whenever the fuck you want to. Um, know what you want, know your worth, and be careful who you listen to, which
Mm.
may be contradictory listening to me. But yeah, I mean, I grew up like, and all the agents and all the people around me that they're white. And, I remember I asked my last agency, I was like, do you have any people of color? Do you have anyone that like I could work with who maybe sees me a little bit better? And I had a white woman as my agent, and she was great for what she did, but until she wasn't. But I asked them that question. They said, oh yeah, we have like Bill in the mailroom. What the fuck? Like that's so frustrating.
Oh, yeah.
So I think recognizing still that maybe we're alone, and you do
Mhm.
really have to fight, and it's unfortunate, and I'm exhausted sometimes. And I think that's why I drink too much matcha in the mornings because it's really hard to do this job, but it's so worth it. And it really does feel good to give that representation to, the little girls who are looking like me and they're like, oh my God, do I have a way out? Can I be who I want to be? Yes, you can. It just, takes a lot.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
Yes.
speaking of representation, just going back to Goosebumps, because I just want to give a
Yeah.
little bit more, for the fans
Yes,
in
yes,
regards to
absolutely.
your time on set, your character. I mean, there's so much to ask because I'm like, what was it like? What was it like working on that set? I mean, there's special effects. You've got David Schwimmer. Let's talk about, working with your co-stars, what you love the most about that. And then obviously your character, what can we expect to see from your character?
Yeah, Alex is my character and she's amazing. For me, even though in ways, yes, she feels like a stereotype, and that was really hard for me to get over because I'm such like a fuck all this person. But she's got a lot of heart, and I managed to make her a bit of a dick, which I think is so fun, but she's also a lovable dick, which I love characters like that. So she's an ex-con. She's recently out of prison, and she's a kid. She's 16, so she's dealing with like puberty and growing up. She's also queer, and she's not super out about it. So for me, that was super beautiful to like deal with all those intricacies and that vulnerability and give voice to a story that we really don't see and that white America definitely doesn't give a shit about, which is awful. So yeah, I was really, really happy to be a part of that. And then my co-stars are amazing. They're just from all walks of life, and that's what Goosebumps is. And I think going back to those stories originally, they always give so many different characters a voice, which is what I really appreciate about it. So it was amazing. It was just a great project to work on.
I mean, your character sounds so well layered and so multidimensional, which is perfect because that's what we all are, right?
Yes, we're just people. We're multifaceted people. Absolutely.
Exactly. And it's so great to see that character written with you representing that character, you know, as our culture, as our like super Latina sister. It's just fantastic. So congratulations on that. I'm so excited and I can't wait to
Absolutely.
see you in that. And I just want to say, I know we're talking about saying no. I forgot who said
Yeah.
this. It was somebody. It might have been the Olsen twins. I don't know. And I'll just say maybe it was them. I mean, because they're like super, you know, well off and everything. Oh, so sorry. My dog is running in. Super well off and everything. But they said the one thing that they learned from their parents is that no is a complete sentence.
Yes.
And when I heard that, I'm like, wow, because I always have to come up with, I don't know if it's, you know, the reasons, even my mom and my grandma, they're always like, we got to say this because of that and that and that. And it's like, why do we have to explain ourselves? We're always backed in the corner trying to explain ourselves as women and as Latinas.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I think that's a hard thing for women in general to learn is you don't need all these clauses around it. And men do, you know, they just say no. We can also just say no. It's so hard. And for some reason, it's so much more painful. But yeah, I mean, stand on business and like speak your truth. And if there's a period at the end of the sentence, then that's it.
Then that's it. Exactly. So everyone say no to watching all the other shows in January.
Yeah.
Just tune in and watch our Francesca on Goosebumps. We absolutely just loved having you. Thank you so much, Francesca, for your time.
Thank you.
I
You
know.
are, yeah, you have such a beautiful spirit. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was great to meet you both. Hope
You
have a
do.
great day.
Oh my God, great to meet you. And to all of our Latinas out there, you know, keep on listening, keep on elevating yourself, supporting each other, you know, listen to Latina Life with Jenna Milena on all of your streaming, you know, podcast platforms. And hasta la próxima vez. Besos
Adios.
y abrazos.
Adios.
Adios.
Adios. And give me a second. Oh my goodness. Where is my, there we are. We're saying goodbye for real now. Bye, everybody.